Let me ask sort of the contemporary question. So Marx and Engels are writing in the midst of the first industrial revolution. So they were aware of the fact that machines to some degree could replace, although at that point it was more augment human labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a world of sort of AI and digitization and technology, couldn't you foresee a future, or even a present for that matter, that is extremely worker light, somewhat capital heavy, although much less capital intensive than building a factory, but is essentially capital generating without workers? So it's capitalism without labor.
It's important to say, I mean, look, AI specifically is a tool that is owned by Google. It is owned by Facebook
Correct.
or whatever, right? In other words, it is not fundamentally different from a loom on which textiles are made, right? If it is producing these sort of things. The question of a workerless future is, I think, interesting to talk about, but it is very sort of distinct from where we are right now. I think it's important to say, I think people don't sort of grasp this. We have been working in a period of de-automization of many parts of the economy. In some automotive factories, for example, it is the case that the factories are now less automated than they were 30 years ago. There has been a rehiring relative to automation. We tend to think that automation is this linear process where we're this automated now, in the future will be that automated. Automation only goes up. In fact, that there are all kinds of sort of facts that go into this. Well, part of the reason why automation slowed to the degree that it did was that we discovered that offshoring was cheaper than automating, right? In other words, that you could exploit child labor in China for cheaper than you could build the robots, etc. A more sort of immediately salient question is like me, right? Like, where am I in the equation, right? Because I am not a equity holder in Substack, right? I don't draw a portion of their earnings as a shareholder. I am not living off of the rents of what has been created. I'm sort of an independent contractor. I am using the machinery provided for me by Substack to be able to create value. And they give me a portion of that value that is insufficient relative to the amount that I'm creating. Again, it's a 90-10 split. It's not a 100% split where I get all the money. So those kind of questions are interesting. But fundamentally, across the economy writ large, talk of AI and sort of assumptions about like driverless cars and things like that, the last 100 years have been a vastly more complicated story about when you use automation and when you use human workers. And it's been revealed that very often companies decide that it's in their financial best interest to hire people rather than to continue to automate, in part because if you automate to a certain extent, right, that you have a growing and growing pool of labor of people who want a job, that necessarily depresses the wages that they expect until you get to the point where they're cheaper than the robots anyway, right? This is like a sort of cyclical sort of relationship between those two things, which is why, for example, OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, that device was trained by thousands and thousands of human users, human employees of OpenAI, I think in places like the Philippines where you can pay very, very little in order to fix all the problems and to look out for things that would get them in trouble, et cetera, right? So even like the examples that we have of the most sort of intense automation, if you want to call it that, in these large language models still sort of depends upon a pool of cheap labor.